There are two ways of seeing the world around us. There's the reality we have accepted, one that's imperfect and unjust. And then there's the world that could be, if we all took the action to reclaim it and restore what was lost. A world of marvels. Debuting in 2024, Deniz and Juan Frigeri's The Ultimates is a dystopian epic building on decades of storytelling, seeing the rebirth of Marvel's Ultimate Universe through an oppressive new world, engineered and ruled over by the villainous super scientist, the Maker. Springing out of Jonathan Hickman's stories on the Ultimate Universe, namely 2023's Ultimate Invasion and Ultimate Universe, the comic was the last title to launch in Phase 1 of this new line of spin-off titles, most of which were envisioned as alternative programming for Marvel's established universe. And with 9 issues and a special out at the time of this video's recording, The Ultimates has become the standard for what this new line is capable of, using scathing political commentary to redefine the publisher's icons while giving a bold new take on their mission statement of saving the world. And though longtime fans might ignore or downplay the title due to its disconnect from the greater Marvel canon, I'd argue Camp and Frigeri's ability to grapple with these big questions has made The Ultimates into one of the most impactful comic books of this modern age. This is the long and brutal journey to reclaim the soul of the superhero. A story about fixing a broken future and avenging a world that never was. Line-wide spoilers to follow. To really understand the greater meaning in the Ultimates, you first have to examine the history of its predecessor and the larger universe that was built around it. The origins of Ultimate Marvel can be traced all the way back to the year 2000, when the publisher, fresh off a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, debuted the imprint with the goal of reimagining their characters and universe, bringing the world outside your window into the new millennium. While this imprint began with a near universally beloved Ultimate Spider-Man, along with updated takes on the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, the line would be primarily defined, for better and for worse, through Mark Millar and Bryan Hitch's series, The Ultimates. Built around this universe's take on the Avengers, Ultimates is an unflinching look into a 2000s America through the lens of superheroes, namely superheroes who have been steeped in the ambiguity and militarism of a global war on terror. If the original Avengers were products of the space-age optimism of the 60s, downplaying political subtext in favor of more fantastic adventures, Millar and Hitch's comic was a hard swing in the other direction, transforming them into a bizarre mixture of Strikeforce and reality TV stars who fought otherworldly aliens and global terrorists alike, all in the service of American interests. These were flawed people that we blindly trusted to police the world at large, people who arguably caused as many problems as they solved. And though the subtext of this idea can often get muddled in Millar and Hitch's original run, along with whatever the heck Ultimates 3 was, other creators would continue to tug at this thread over the years, interrogating a world shaped by government-backed heroes and the imperialist ideas they embody. It's only natural that this twist on the superhero myth would eventually give rise to the Maker, a sociopathic version of Reed Richards bent on tearing down and remaking the universe in his own image. Emerging in the pages of 2010's Ultimate Mystery, the Maker would go on to become the grand antagonist of the imprint, battling the Ultimates across Jonathan Hickman's tenure and attempting to build a better version of his universe after its destruction in 2015's Secret Wars. After several false starts, this mission would be realized in 2023's Ultimate Invasion, with the Maker discovering a new reality and manipulating its history to give himself supreme power. From the beginning, the parallels between the original Ultimate Universe, nicknamed 1610, and its successor, named 6160, are made abundantly clear. Just like with the original Ultimates, this is a world that has suffered a series of catastrophes, and as a result, has fallen back on the strengths of a superpowered overclass through the Maker and his council. Hickman even has Bryan Hitch return as the artist for Ultimate Invasion to cement these parallels. But instead of legitimizing these systems of power the way Millar did, Hickman only doubles down on the divide between this broken world and the people who rule over it. Despite his limitless knowledge, the Maker's empire is closer to our own reality than the utopia he's been searching for, with murky alliances shaping world events and countless heroes either removed or co-opted to keep these oppressive systems in place. It's this idea, a world stolen from its people through an act of cosmic imperialism, that would inspire Deniz Camp to give his own take on the Ultimates, flipping the power dynamics of an oppressive world and crafting a story about striking back against an overclass that's stolen the future. Born to Turkish and Filipino immigrant parents and raised in the American Midwest, Camp developed his style by filtering superheroes through the lens of national ideologies and global struggles, most famously through his 2022 image series 20th Century Men, a heightened retelling of the war in Afghanistan that shows the human cost of a battle between two warring superpowers. If you're interested in learning more about this, my friend Kirby from Comic Crackle has a whole video on it. And you can see this same perspective throughout the new Ultimate Universe, with the imperialism of Miller's Run giving way to something even darker and more oppressive, shown through the eyes of people victimized by these systems of power.
Our Ultimates is absolutely in conversation with the original Ultimates. In some ways it's a response to it, in others an inversion of it. But it's also in conversation with the world. How could it not be?
Camp states.
I think the best way to show respect to what Mark and Brian and Andrew, Chris and Paul did is to be true to the spirit of it. To me, that means fresh storytelling and channeling the anxieties and energies of the time. It means letting the world in a little bit, so that's what we're doing. Where that Ultimates was channeling post 9/11 paranoia, this one is addressed to the nagging sense that everything's gone wrong somehow, that things were supposed to be better than this. In that way, the two series will feel very different, but I think, or hope, ours is true to the spirit and the ambition of the original.
Despite the many attempts to ground them in reality over the decades, superheroes have always been held up as transcendent ideas, figures meant to channel the belief that we can all do our part to build a better world. As such, the mission statement given in issue 1 of the series feels like Camp reaffirming the spirit these characters were built on. Even transplanted into a world like ours, they can't just uphold the status quo. It's in their nature to fix what's broken. But to do so, these Ultimates will have to move beyond the murky ambiguity of their predecessors and work to inspire the heroism of a new generation.
I told you! This is how it starts. This is how it always starts. Someone has to light the fire.
Since the arrival of Superman in 1938, superheroes have played a key part of the American myth, infusing the post-war optimism of the 20th century into broader tales of good triumphing over evil. Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with a little escapism. These are all stories built on metaphors, after all. But when brought closer to reality, the disconnect between these symbols and the nation they're supposed to embody becomes apparent. Across the series' early issues, Camp blends countless fragments of real-world history into the fiction of Earth 6160, using superheroes to walk through the darker realities behind the American myth and how they've built a dystopian present. The Monster Island stronghold for this world's Hulk is a direct reference to the Pacific Proving Grounds, whose people were poisoned and later abandoned after decades of nuclear tests by the American military. Just like the energy giants behind the Keystone Pipeline project, the Roxxon Corporation is treated as its own sovereign body, deploying small armies to exploit resources on Native American land. In an eerie counterpart to the Patriot Act, the Maker's Council uses the destruction of Stark Tower in New York to brand the Ultimates and their sympathizers as terrorists, targeting anyone who questions their regime with extreme prejudice. Each of these comparisons do their part to subvert the myth of American exceptionalism, but it's the group's failure to kickstart the heroes of old that really drives the point home. To inspire real change, these new Ultimates need to reflect our reality, looking beyond the simpler terms of good and evil to change the institutional injustices that brought us here.
I read the original Ultimates and I thought it was a clear response to 9/11 and a satire of American hegemony at the time, so I wanted our Ultimates to be a response to our times.
The writer reflects.
What does a modern hero look like? It doesn't look like someone who's trying to maintain the status quo. I'm doing research more about the world around us and trying to draw as much of that as I can in a fictional way, which I think is the core mission statement of really any Ultimate book. I'm trying to draw from the real world, some lesser known parts of real history, and maybe some very obvious satire of real world issues. I felt it was a cool inversion of the original. It was personal to me and felt topical. So for all those reasons, it just felt right.
Naturally, these inversions end up having different effects on each of the title's leads. Captain America, the Human Torch, Iron Lad, and Reed Richards, who's taken on the name of Doom, all characters who embody traits of American exceptionalism, grapple with their personal beliefs when their view of the world shatters. others like Thor, Sif, Giant Man, and the Wasp are refocused through the POV of average people, who reluctantly serve until they're awakened to their own power. But maybe the most meaningful additions are Camp's takes on She-Hulk, Hawkeye, America Chavez, and Luke Cage, who the writer uses as symbols to empower the victims of institutional violence. While scope and pacing can vary, each of the series' issues are built around introducing a new hero and defining the larger cause they embody, with the Maker's temporary imprisonment at the end of Invasion giving a ticking clock to the team's grander mission: 18 months to save the world, undo the damage of the regime, and build a force to guard against what comes after. And with each character having wildly different origins and perspectives on the world, friction on how to achieve these goals is inevitable. Just like realism, creators can utilize humanity in superhero comics as a means of deconstructing them, with the characters' imperfections challenging their dedication to a higher calling. It's the same approach that would spiral out of control on Miller's Ultimates, with the team's personal issues and nationalist ties forcing them to disband before starting the whole thing all over again. And though the same push and pull between the human perspective and a greater good is present in Camp's series, the writer is able to use this humanity to deepen these heroes and their bond, giving moments of mutual understanding to different pairings on the team. It's this acknowledgement of a shared humanity that forges this group of individuals into something more, specifically a team built on justice that's restorative instead of retributive. None of these issues, be it ecological restoration, reclamation of human rights, combating propaganda and paranoia, or defying an oppressive government, can be conquered by a single person. But that doesn't mean they're impossible to beat either. It's only by realizing that strength comes through solidarity that we're able to manifest the potential seen in superheroes. When we act together, no problem is too big to solve.
The entire purpose of the book is to change the status quo, to change the world,
Camp muses.
In 616, that would be kind of an empty threat. In the Ultimate Universe, it's not only possible, it's probable. Whether they change it for the better or worse is a different story.
Of course, restoring what was lost is only part of the mission. To really change the world for the better, the systems that made these injustices have to be removed, and in some cases, that means engaging in the same violent methods that created them. The pull between these two methods of justice is something that's complicated the superhero genre since its beginnings, and as such, becomes a major struggle across the book's first arc. The comic's art, largely supplied by Juan Frigeri with colors by Federico Blee, does a great job of literalizing this collision between the spirit of classic Marvel, shown through vibrant reds, blues, and golds, and the bleaker greens, purples, and grays of this new reality. It's a major departure from Brian Hitch's widescreen hyperrealism, but it also gives plenty of attention to the violence of this world, with our heroes rocketing through people like human bullets, breaking bones, slashing limbs, and exploding bodies. If I had one critique, I'd say it sometimes swings too much toward the mainstream, with the more traditional layouts of each issue focusing on big moments of superhero action while downplaying their consequences. Aside from Phil Noto's haunting work on issue 4, which peels back the layers of trauma that shaped Reed Richards into this world's doom. But even with these shortcomings, I think this style does a great job of bridging these two takes on Marvel's heroes, contrasting the scrappier, brighter energy of the Ultimates against the oppressive world they're trying to save. But the writer is also quick to state that these are imperfect people, trying to uproot a world that they're all still products of. And the friction between these two extremes, a violent past and a hopeful future, is what Camp uses to heighten the larger themes of the book moving forward, giving a more complex take on the nature and impact of these characters.
It's a statement, one they can't ignore. The Ultimates are here, and we're going to leave a mark.
With its major focus on real-world history and current events, the beating heart of Camp's Ultimates is built around an impending war for the future, and whether or not this growing team can overturn systems that have woven themselves into the history of the world. Like its fellow titles in the new line, Ultimates is framed inside a series of month-to-month snapshots, with each issue serving as an episode while progressing the larger story in real time. And while I think the mileage can vary on this, with some books lacking a sense of urgency or completely ignoring the framing device, Camp's story keeps building on the ominous warnings of Hickman's miniseries, using the team's 2-year time frame to raise the stakes while teasing out more personal struggles for each character. With Issue 8's intro to this world's Guardians of the Galaxy, framed as a Morrisonian take on the Legion of Superheroes, the writer reveals that this brighter future was always possible, and was even in place before the Maker's arrival. But while these glimpses of hope keep peering through, the scars of the Maker's work run deep, both in this world and the heroes struggling to save it. Hank Pym's terror over what he might become is enough to shake him to the core, leading him to question the very nature of the mission he's undertaken. Reed Richards' years of grief has turned into an obsession, prompting questions of whether he's actually loyal to his fellow Ultimates or simply using them to rebuild his own past. And despite his more innocent, idealistic personality, Iron Lad has definitely been marked by the team's war, with his moral shift hinting towards an even darker turn down the road. Each of these secrets, as well as the traitor teased in Camp's 1 Year In special, threaten to tear the Ultimates apart from within, but it's their crushing defeat at the hands of the Hulk in Issue 6 that deals their biggest setback yet, leaving them to question whether or not they're making real change, or just perpetuating a self-destructive pattern.
I should thank you. Blowing up pipelines, destabilizing power grids, burning down the White House. You've only driven them deeper into our arms. Nothing makes one crave the status quo quite like a violent threat to it. Of course, a few will be inspired, a few always are, but most will be afraid. Afraid of chaos, afraid of change, afraid of losing what little they have. In time, they'll come to wonder if the Ultimates ever truly existed. If the whole thing wasn't an elaborate conspiracy, if you didn't really work for us all along. In a way, I suppose you did. Rest now, little Stark. You've earned it. In the end, you are our best little soldier.
Through this first major battle, Camp is literally using his reinvented myth to confront the more fascist elements of the old, and question whether or not reality is capable of the same change. And though classic superhero stories are mostly built around the belief that righteousness is inevitable, that moral strength always translates to physical strength, the Ultimates' defeat and the fragile state they're left in delivers a very different message. When you enforce a myth enough, it becomes reality. In this case, the Council's myth that peace can only be achieved through violent conquest, that prosperity can only exist when the few hold power over the many. It's a very literal take on the concept of the culture war, and naturally becomes the driving force for the book's later issues. To really unseat this system, the Ultimates will have to tear down the myth that it helps the world instead of hurts. But do people really want to accept this message, and put in the work to build something better? The central force behind a culture war is the fear of change, of one reality being supplanted by another, and not surprisingly, this same fear is often used through history to push back against progressive reform, giving reactionaries the means to legitimize harmful systems by writing them into law. Slavery might be seen as evil, but nobody bats an eye when it's woven into America's prisons, even as it exploits the wrongly convicted.
Slavery is social death. It is to be forever cut off from your context and community. It is to have never been born. They have made us into non-people explicitly. They say it's about justice. They say it's about the law. It's not about any of that shit.
So, what's it all about?
It's about power, man.
This fear of change can even be seen through the book's divisive real-world reception, with many of its bad faith critics threatening the writer and his family over what they claim as anti-American commentary. In reality, while it's critical of America's historical injustices, both at home and abroad, the Ultimate seems focused on something far more nuanced, examining America's myths, how they covered up a tragic past, and how they might still lead to a hopeful future for all. The book's latest issues only deepen these questions, with the team now struggling to rebuild with less than a year remaining to complete their mission. Though the writer refuses to give any concrete answers to where his story will go, these questions are key to the book's message, encouraging readers to redefine their relationships to the myths and symbols that influence them. While I think these stories are too broad to give us the answers we look for in reality, we can still look to them for inspiration, and channel their spirit into real-world action. The idyllic past we've envisioned for ourselves may never have existed, But even as the present continues to darken, the future is ever changing, and that means there will always be hope to continue the fight for something better. What was made can be unmade. The trick is remembering that the power to change the world has always been in our hands. Hey everyone, and thanks for checking out today's video. Hopefully, like me, you've really been enjoying the Ultimates month to month, and with the first chapter of the book wrapping up, it felt like the perfect time to dive in, cover what's been done, and how it sets the stage for what's to come, both in the book and the Ultimate universe at large. As someone who grew up reading the original Ultimates back when it was coming out, it's been really cool using each to look at where we are culturally and how camp wants to use the book to question where we're going in addition to where we are now. I'd definitely love to revisit this in the future, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see too. If you liked this video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every little bit helps the channel out a lot. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Carol Ann Brenneman, The Comics Cave, and my patrons, who are helping me to grow this channel and continue doing what I love, and hopefully what you love too. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember, we all have the power to keep the fight for the future alive.